I think we're going. All right, chaps and chapettes and everybody in between. Let's do introductions. I'll go first. Hi, I'm Patrick Mulborough, and I'm a writer, musician, comedian, and kind of, I guess, like a bit of a burnout living in Nungawajuk land in Fremantle. Uh, and I used to be a writer for a living, and now I'm here. Next, who
I'm Nat. I'm a Chinese Indonesian born writer based in Melbourne on the lands of the people of the Kulin Nation. I write nonfiction articles about identity stuff, doing a few things, studying at RMIT, doing international development. I'm doing a photo exhibition for next year, and also working on a contemporary adult fiction for pitching end of this year. Josh's turn.
I'm Josh. Oops, sorry. Hello, I'm Josh Medch. I am on Ghana country. I guess I'm a jack of all trades: actor, writer, producer, storyteller. I guess, yeah.
All right, let's get down to brass tacks. We're here to discuss the intersection of mental health and identity, and well, speaking for myself, disability within the context of working in the arts. I'm going to start off with a tough question. Are you okay? Basic premise for people. What do we think of the reductionism of mental health discourse in this country?
It's not terribly nuanced, is it?
Yeah.
It's very much on the person suffering to answer that question and then ask for help, isn't it? You know, it's not it's a hand, but it's not very I don't know, helpful. That's my perspective, at least.
Yeah.
Natasha?
Agreed. Also, most recently, the Are You OK campaign did a product placement with Kit Kat, so that's fun to see.
Yeah.
Kentucky, eat some chocolate.
Good old Ruach. They always sound like a Nordic god to me, of some kind of demon, Ruach, coming to wreak havoc in our minds. But it is that thing in the last 10 years where Australia, which obviously has crazy high mental health and suicide rates for such a prosperous country, has this thing, for want of a better term, for madness ingrained into our history and our culture, and has always struggled to represent that in the art and the national art. I'm wondering for you guys personally, how do you grapple with it in your own work, and how do you choose to represent it to audiences?
I think when it comes to writing or making anything about your identity, there's this weird almost expectation to kind of like out yourself, especially if you're writing fiction. And I think it comes from a good place. Like the interrogation comes from accountability of like, who are you to write about XYZ, about like anxiety, depression, this. But at the same time, sometimes I think it can also lead to this like entitlement from consumers or from readers where they feel like they have the right to know everything about you and judge you based on that. And it sometimes forces us into like unsafe situations, I want to say. A good example. Yeah, a good example was quite recently Becky Albertalli. If you guys have heard of her, she's pretty big in the YA spheres, and she was recently like forcefully coming out as a bisexual because for the last 5 years she's been harassed for writing books with queer protagonists, and people are like, "You're straight. Who are you to write these books? Like you don't belong in this lane. Get the fuck out." That kind of thing. And so she wrote this big statement being like, "Well, I'm not. And now you guys know. So hope you're happy with that." But it was a really like stressful and terrifying experience for her leading up to that. And she didn't want to say it publicly, but she felt the need to because she just couldn't take the hate and like the policing. And I think sometimes that happens with mental health as well, with this like weird
Definitely.
Yeah.
Josh,
kind
did
of
you have
gatekeeping.
anything?
Yeah.
Well, I with so I make a lot of theater and stuff, and I guess part of trying to be truthful to my own experience and the characters that I've created, their experience is it can be really complicated and messy trying to translate that stuff to the stage and to live performance, not just in the words you're capturing, but in the showing of it, in the performance of it. And I think part of the way that I've managed to grapple with it is to keep it as messy as it is and not try to clean it up and make it palatable, because it is hard and painful. And doing a show, 15 nights in a row is just effectively re-traumatizing yourself every time. If it does have, sort of triggering or quite emotional work that you've put into it. So I think the way that I, is just not trying to, make it as palatable as people may want or fantasize about it being. That sort of manic pixie character that people are, or giving them that grunginess, that realness, that unfinished thoughtness.
I'm excited now because this is a thing that I obsess over a lot in all my work. But just briefly going back to what you were saying, Natasha, about audience expectations. My own experiences with that have been kind of interesting over the last 5 or so years, because I was writing regular mental health essays for Vice, and they would always go very viral, and they get translated into all these languages, whatever, and they circle around every 6 months. And things I wrote 4 years ago, including things I wrote where, looking back, I experienced with misdiagnosis, or I was writing while very manic and stuff like that, and this just 26-year-old me is preserved in amber, going viral every 6 months, and I have to respond to this person gun to my head in a hostage situation. I couldn't remember a thing I wrote a week ago, so 4 years ago, gone. But my DMs constantly are filled with people from around the world, either explicitly sharing pretty traumatic stories with me, or asking me for help a lot. And when I was younger and this first started to happen, I really because the way my brain is wired, I would really try to help them out, and I'd be helping some guy in Idaho while I'm in Perth, who is in a mental institute. I had one guy whose girlfriend was put in a mental institution in Portugal, and I was helping him navigate the Portuguese mental health care system, which I don't know much about still. But it's a strange thing with parasocial relationships now with creators, and for this to get conflated. And as I'm going to lead into the next question, I guess there's 3 forks you guys have opened up here, but I'm going to go in order. The example you gave, Natasha, is interesting to me, because you're talking about a YA author who had to out there themselves and discuss their sexuality. Whereas, say, race, class, gender, and sexuality are traditionally aligned with identity in the arts, or even cultural capitalist circles. I think health, and for me, there's a separation, and I'm in both camps here in the discourse with mental health and disability. But in the last 5 years, there has been this shift where health and disability has been tied up with identity.
Yeah. It's become another extension of it almost.
Right. And it is that same thing of having to out yourself, but it's what do I print my post my doctor's transcript on Instagram or something like that?
Yeah. Can I recall this meeting for my fans? Sorry,
right.
I'm just asking my therapist.
Yeah.
And what is the onus on the artist really to have to do that? I mean,
yeah.
Ooh.
I guess that comes back to that wanting to seem genuine, and that that honesty of what the core of art should be, I guess, or writing or whatever, is that honesty. And if people are connecting with something and they feel like maybe it's not honest, they want to know, is this person actually like this? How do they know these things?
Yeah.
and I guess that's how people can so easily get obsessed, because they want their own, they want confirmation on what they've created in their head, and then you owe it to them for some reason.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, for a lot of identities, especially that haven't been represented that much, there's all this pressure that like once you write about this thing, it has to represent every single person's experience of that identity or that experience. And if someone doesn't relate to it, they're like, that's not what I experienced, that's not valid, yada, 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 yada. But at the same time, it's a very personal and subjective thing. Like, even if we're talking about anxiety, the symptoms are going to be different, the triggers are going to be different for each person. So it's, yeah, I guess there's just like this desperation to want to be represented, but the way that it manifests is not always good.
Yeah, I find it's interesting for me because I feel a lot of my major mental health issues or whatever appear a lot in pop culture in very cliche and sanitized ways, and it's really interesting because I'm on the autism spectrum, and that's a whole interesting thing about like identity and culture, and there really is, especially now, a bit more a community and like a level of like disability pride now tied up with this, where there wasn't 5 years ago, which for me has been kind of liberating, but also very strange at the same time, because there is also this strange inner community, hyper online people policing, where it's like, oh, you're not autistic enough, especially with an illness where, for anybody who's high functioning, masking is like the major part of it, and it's like, yeah, I'm not going to start like stimming and like rocking back and forth in front of you because, I don't want to get laid, but like, it's like that kind of thing. It's like, how much do I have to fake it?
Yeah.
And for me, and what I'm like always interested in is working in the arts, the people that artists.
Well, is Patrick frozen, or is it just on my screen?
I think he is. He's frozen on mine as well.
Patrick! Do you want to read the second question from our totally unscripted script? No? Yeah, sure. I'll read the question. So the second one is sort of about mainstream acceptance of public mental illness. So,
was that me?
Yay!
Right. Yeah, I was in the never realm for a while there. Be a cloud over the house. R.I.P. MBN. Yeah, what are we talking about? Yeah, the MBN and why it's eroding my brain. Malcolm Turnbull's fault. I think what I was trying to say is we mainly deal with able-minded and able-bodied and healthy people in the arts on the administrative and financial side of the biz, I find, usually. And to what extent do you find yourself conforming? I always feel like with mental health discourse, the ill have to meet the healthy 9/10 of the way, as opposed to them coming halfway towards us. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in my own experience, it's definitely hard to ask for what you need, and so you end up finding yourself compromising more because you don't know how to ask this other person to compromise, especially when it's easier to just sort of go nonverbal and navigate it in your head and just sort of deal with everything without trying to make waves. And so I definitely feel that 9/10 thing. But I guess it's also about the environments, if the environment makes you feel safe to be able to ask for it. But there's a lot of variables in it, but in general, that 9/10 thing is oh yeah.
Yeah.
Natasha, yeah.
I think because I'm fairly new to the writing scene. I haven't experienced anything too bad, I want to say. Everyone's been fairly accommodating and curious, even if it is just in the form of like, tick a box if you identify with this thing. But if when I do ask for something, usually people are quite accommodating, and yeah, no one's really like no, and just leave it at that. So maybe I'm pretty lucky. But
Yeah. I think for me, and maybe because I've been around a while, but I don't know. It is changing for the better, but and also like you said, like, there's a lot of variables, and it depends who you're dealing with. And I feel like my experience of dealing with large media companies, um, especially in like about like 5 or so years ago, when before the Facebook algorithm destroyed the content industry, or like the online publishing industry, really, there was this kind of boom of trauma as content.
yeah,
And for me, interestingly, it became like an accessibility thing, and I don't mean in a disabled, not in the sense of the work itself, but of getting into an industry which I'd already been working in for some time, but working from Perth, where there are so few opportunities in any of the arts, and then having illness and disability problems on top of that, the basic A to B structures of like putting your foot in the door were always kind of impossible. And when that, if insincere boom of that kind of content happened, like it just took one good piece, I guess, for me to get that in. It was a strange kind of like exploitative late capitalist vibe to it, but at the same time, it was like being made so exclusionary and difficult for me. And now this is my ticket to ride, I guess. You know, the Willy Wonka tunnel scream chicken decapitation thing.
yeah,
Sort of like wielding
Oh,
the thing that was being used against you as your greatest asset.
as a brand almost. Which
yes, as a brand, yeah.
hate that. I hate that you have to choose like some part of yourself to be marketable and to be like, this is the girl that writes about like race and this, and it it just feels very strange, the whole like marketing aspect of it. But I suppose it's, I don't want to say necessary, but it's just the way that people hook audiences and I guess gain their attention, which is kind of shitty. So, but
Yeah, I
capitalism.
think you're right. Because like I feel like I come at it like as a, if I describe myself as an artist, it would be as like a huckster, and like as a comedian, especially, it's like, even especially like with writing, it's like I like you need a hook to reel the audience in. Like if you can reel them in with that and sucker punch them with the good stuff that you actually want to do, like fine.
Yeah.
Josh, sorry, do you have anything on that? Did you have something you wanted to say?
Only agreement. I don't think I have anything to add, but I definitely agree with that. Yeah, you know, having a good hook that's not necessarily what you want to be focusing on, but yeah, you need a lure, like some bait on your lure. You know, that's. But
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I got an interesting question from Isabel here in the chat. Is it like feasible to opt out of making this your brand without the financial privilege? Because, like I just said, for some of us, it's the only in to this industry to begin with, is branding yourself. Is choosing not to do that itself its own form of privilege in your guys' eyes?
I think so. Yeah. I think so, but
I don't know.
yeah. But maybe because of this whole expectation of like once you write about something 3 or 4 times or even like 2 times or something, then it becomes your thing. I was very aware of that, especially even with this festival. Like I only wrote one article brushing on mental health, and I think I did one other panel talking about like mental health and self-care and that kind of stuff. And then when I got the program for this one, both of my panels are about that. And I was excited and like, yay, festival. But also in the shower, I was like, have I become this like poster girl for for mental health? And if so, like what does that mean for the future if that's gonna be like a source of income? But I don't know yet. Maybe yeah, I think it does take some sort of privilege to be like, I want to do this thing and this thing and this thing and diversify my body of work and continually generate content and income through doing that. But I don't think a lot of people will get the chance to do that or are able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I rarely generate income from this. So I feel like I have that as a weird privilege where it doesn't really matter what my content is. I just kind of I write what I'm feeling about, or the stories I want to tell, and I don't sort of veer away from tackling things when they come up, I guess. So I guess it's tricky because I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this is really like a brand thing. I guess I'm just happy to have those discussions maybe a bit more, and don't
Right.
I don't know. It's tricky because there's a lot of people talking about a lot of their feelings and a lot of what they're going through and stuff. So,
I mean, that's the other thing is that it has kind of become a trend. Like, I remember, so yeah, I don't know, because I have published a lot on these topics, even though it's to me really like quite a small part of like a pretty large body of work. I still have about 30 or 40 like major pieces, I guess, that are about mental health or whatever, and like stuff on stage. But I don't personally like sit around humming and hawing about it too much.
Yeah.
But I remember like again, like so about 4 years ago now. Yeah, I think it was 2016. I got offered a book deal by quite a large Australian publishing company to write like a memoir mental health book based on these pieces. Ironically, it fell apart because I was having a separate like nervous breakdown. But like I remember at the time being like, oh, because they're like, oh, do you want to write a book? And I was like, boy, do I! Like, I want to write a book about this. And they're like, oh no, like we want you to write a book about like wanting to kill yourself and like being manic and stuff and like your wacky adventures. And I was like, the kind of book you want, that like soft, sad, like let's have a discussion about being suicidal as a 20-something-year-old man in this country. Like personally, like I would never pick that up and read it. It doesn't interest me that much. I'm just gonna lead to my next thing. What for me interests me artistically is how to represent like honest representation of madness in the art itself. I definitely have pieces of mine that if I'm writing about these topics, if I'm at the peak of a manic episode, I'll try to write about mania in a way that actually mirrors like the way that manic thought works with the hopping and like hyperreferentiality and the excitability. When I'm at the worst of a suicidal ideation, I tend to write pieces that read like suicide notes. And I most recently have spent a lot of time writing large fiction and nonfiction that is meant to be an honest representation of autistic thought, and not in the way that it's usually translated to the sane and healthy, which is I don't know how to explain that, but you know what I mean? Here's like, it's almost like a high school essay of like, here's what this is kind of thing from this cozy version, as opposed to like, here's what this is. I'm like, here's what it's like to be inside this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you guys try to do the same thing? Or?
I don't think I've reached that state yet because when I write about very personal things, I sometimes write it from like a bit of a distance because I find that writing it from a very, very close distance is really hard and uncomfortable. And I don't know. It's like I think I don't want to, I almost don't want to sacrifice my own wellness in the name of creativity. And that sounds really selfish, but at the same time, I'm trying to, yeah, I'm trying to kind of work that distance of being like, I'm comfortable with the content and the depth of this piece to the point where if it goes out in public, I won't be absolutely horrified, like 5 years down the line or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, I grew up in a weird phase between non-technology to technology. So I'm always very, very, very aware of like if you put things out in public, you can never take it back. It becomes public domain. People can do whatever they want with it. So that has clung very tightly to me, especially when talking about pieces of my life or talking about real people or things that happened.
Josh, do you have experiences with that?
I think so, but it's like I'm like getting lost thinking about it.
I think a good conversation.
Like trying to capture that sort of that naturalistic, that feeling to the page, and then going back when you're not in that space and reading it and being like, does that feel right? I think there's lots of different levels.
I always say write manic, edit depressed. That's the way to go about it.
I think that's like a play on what was it? George Carlin, write sober, edit stoned.
Edit
Hemingway. Oh, Hemingway had write drunk, edit sober. But well, that guy's mental health record.
I guess Carlin's at the front of my head.
Right. That's it. I like another one from Isabel here. Okay, about their like romanticization of mental health, mental illness in media, which I feel like there's a lot of like weird twee Netflix shows at the moment about like teens with autism. I get sent them all the time, being like, "Oh, have you watched this?" And I'm like, "This is the last thing I want to watch. If I want autistic representation, I would just watch Data in Star Trek and Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos. That's all I need." But I feel like it's strange to see this, which I guess is good for the discourse, but it's also a very strange Disney-fied version of mental illness in this kind of media. Do you guys think it's, I don't know, do you guys think there's a bit of a shift towards it becoming a bit more realistic isn't even the right word, but genuine, I guess?
It's definitely, I think we're on the stepping stones across the tumultuous raging river, I think. Inevitably the discourse will fall in the river a few times before it actually makes it across. But I think these kind of expressions are useful because people are identifying that they're not real, and like I guess great swathes of people are watching it and taking it for reality, or not really reading further into it and being like, well, this is how it is. But there are other people that are being vocal about it not being real, and I think that's where a lot of representation in a lot of different ways starts. Is that that fantasy representation slowly morphing into a realer, more grounded, nuanced representation.
I agree,
but I don't know how far across the river we are.
Yeah, that's the question, right? Like, I think sometimes now, even when I see something that I thought was good representation, I'll find out it was written by someone who's like not even part of that community or know anyone as that community, and then I'll be like,
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about it now. So yeah, it's always very confusing. I guess maybe the I hate to say this word moral is just not to put anything on a pedestal and just be quite critical of everything. It's really exhausting.
Yeah,
There's really no
it's
other way.
very exhausting,
nowadays.
and it's kind of frightening. I mean, it can be hard to live in the ultra kind of policed online discourse that our generation of artists are in all the time when it comes
Yeah.
to this stuff, especially if you have a learning disability or if you're manic or ADHD, where like a core part of the illness is like saying things compulsively that, like, push comes to shove, you don't really believe or care about. As for me, it's my brain is just constantly spewing. So for me, like, I have burned bridges in this career and industry and Twitter for some fake, like, offhanded remark I've made that, again, like, I have no memory of, because I essentially have, a compulsive need to never shut up. And it's that thing of like, oh, it's strange with this community, especially when it's being policed by people who are essentially outside it, where people be like, oh, you should say this like this, and discussion should be had in this way. And it's like, yeah, buddy, I'm too fucking crazy to do that. Like, that's half the problem. I'm shelving lithium so I can slow myself down. Like, I don't know what I would tell you. But don't shelve lithium, kids. If you can take anything away from National Young Writers Festival, that's my big tip. Everyone's in Melbourne. They got just ketamine galore over there. I gotta see what I mean. I gotta stop. But again, though, yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Right. I don't know if it's that on topic, but I have that little voice that always just like, you should say this because this is what someone in a sitcom would say. You should say this because it would be funny. You don't believe it, but it would be funny for the moment. So when you look back, you've got a funny memory. And it's like constantly struggling with that and trying to put that into things, I think, into the writing. It's taking control of the little voice, which I guess is what we're all doing.
Yeah, that's why I'm in therapy. On that same note, I guess, and Isabel was talking about this in chat, about we're talking about this being intertwined with brand, and almost like having to fuel mental illness and troubles with self-destructive behavior to now maintain this identity, which artists have been doing. We bring up Hemingway, and like, oh, Papa, like, that's famously what did him in the end, was his machismo, madness, and depression and alcoholism was turned into his brand, commodified, and then he had to live as a cartoon character for the last 10 years of his life, and it literally killed him.
Yeah.
There's countless other artists that are like that. Do you think people in our age group are falling into the same trap, if in a very different way? With less sex and drugs and rock and roll, but
like a different version of that,
like performative madness almost.
Yeah, there's definitely the romance of it, I think, and that image in the fantasy. It's living a fantasy in a way. But yeah, there's definitely a part of it though where a lot of social things happen, and a lot of networking and stuff is built around that fantasy, because maybe the people that are facilitating these network things don't understand that it's not necessary, I think. And so you have all these artists that are thrown into a party that's been facilitated by venue administrators, and there's lots of booze and low lighting, and we're like, okay, well, we're not artists, we're actors right now, and I think there's definitely it's different. I think it's less I think more performative, intentional performativeness in a way.
Natasha?
I really dislike this discourse. Like, I really dislike this intense romanticization of suffering and trauma. And I think there's a very, well, I guess the line is not always clear, but it's different when you're writing to deconstruct a traumatic experience, or like, I guess, to understand it or to represent it, and things like that. And just purely like traumatizing yourself to create something. Yeah, it frustrates me because it's not only prevalent in the writing community, and I think this stereotype is perpetuated even outside of it. Like when I talk to someone or someone new for the first time and I say that I'm a writer, then they have this immediate idea of like what a writer is, which is like they're a lonely, sad kid who had a bunch of like fucked up stuff happen to them, and now they're just like trying to live through it. Whether that's true or not, debatable. But also, like, I don't like that that's like the blanket thought that comes with this profession. I especially hate that. I wouldn't want like young people who see this as like a hobby or interest or even like a career to think that they have to fit into that mold to be part of this community, because it's just not true. At least we're working towards not making it true. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. One last question I think we got time for. What do you guys think the upsides of this visibility now? The changes in the discourse around mental health, the changes to the freedom and how we can discuss it, represent it, or if you don't think there are any.
I like the visibility part, even though it is contested to how much should be visible and the repercussions of that. Sort of touching on what you said, Patrick, about like people reaching out to you, telling you all these stories about their own experiences or stuff that they're struggling with. Sometimes it kind of feels like, oh, I didn't sign up for that, and now I can't take back that part of it. It's not like you can say to someone like, I don't care, or or just when they're barring like their soul, or like this huge thing that they're going through. Like, yeah, but at the same time, sometimes when I don't know, sometimes I think about like younger me, if she heard this conversation, or people in like my brother's age who are like 14, 15, who hear these conversations and they can feel a bit more comfortable talking about it in their own private lives, then that's the good of it. And yeah, they might not have anyone else to talk about it with, or they don't have any other source of like input to talk about these things. So I'm glad that there's more space for that, and for it to be more normalized. But yeah, I don't know if the good outweighs the bad.
Yeah.
I hope it does. But yeah, like you said, Josh, I think we're still getting there. It's still a long way.
Yeah.
Josh,
I think well, it's those connections, and the visibility and other people being able to see, there's another person and they're doing things. I think there is having to find that balance where you're still protecting yourself, and maybe it would be up to the the venue or the publisher or the consumer to have better I don't know,
boundaries.
is like a mixture of like boundaries and like I guess that comes from like education as well, because not everyone knows how to see boundaries, let alone respect them. So I think there's a lot of positives, but they can be more positive if there's more I guess education and an open discourse, which is, it's all part of itself, and I think it'll just keep rolling like a snowball down a hill, when eventually the positives will outweigh the negatives of having
hopefully
I feel like
refer to someone else if someone reaches out.
I'm thinking like, man, I was 18 in 2008. I'm sure I kind of started writing for money, And this discourse, like this thing, just like just conversation, not in the arts, but on just like any like social, cultural level, just really didn't exist where I was from. It was just not a thing. And I was from a family of pretty crazy people, in a pretty crazy community. And like it was like a hard education for me, even like with diagnosis and very empathic people in my life. The actual nature of the discourse and its subtleties and its nuances and boundaries that I myself broke and had other people broken. It's a brutal learning process. I think for me, it's just that the main thing is, I think the main thing for me is like what I said earlier about the 9/10. I want the healthy and the sane to do a little bit more homework and to put in a little bit more effort themselves. I could go on a 40-minute rant about like last year when there was a weird misuse of the term emotional labor going around, where I'd just be like, oh, my friend told me they were feeling sad, and like I can't talk to them for 2 months because like that's a burden I can't have in my thought space. Like kind of vibe that normies were doing, that was just like driving me mad and was its own kind of strange externalized ableism. And I think the thing that's happened to me in the last 2 years was kind of getting radicalized by my friend Grant Grunwald, or HTML Flowers, as people know him, who writes a lot about crippled rage, and he's got cystic fibrosis, and he's kind of coming from a physically disabled perspective. But in my like first conversation with him, that thing is like an autistic person of being like, yeah, like fuck normal people, like fuck having to bend everything to them, and like literally having to drug yourself and spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to reach like a certain level of normalcy that is not satisfying to me. Like fuck having to slow down. You know, it's hard to be a Sonic in a world full of Luigis, but what are you gonna do?
Wow.
Great,
That's I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Nintendo's gonna sue my ass again. The Kirby people are coming for me. On that note, I think we have to wrap it up. So Natasha, Josh, thanks so much for talking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Natasha.
Yeah. National Young Writers Festival. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel.